I used to think I understood fear. At 12 years old, my definition was simple. Things that made you jump in a movie, dogs that barked too loud when you rode past on your bike, the idea of walking into school unprepared for a test. But I didn't know that fear could be patient, that it could watch you for hours without making a sound, that it could crawl so deep under your skin you'd still feel it years later in an empty room, with the lights on, telling yourself you're safe. I learned that in Bridgestone, Ohio, during the kind of winter night people around here would describe as brutal in the morning over coffee, shaking their heads like the cold was the only danger out there. Bridgestone isn't the kind of place where people expect bad things to happen. It's small enough that strangers stand out, but big enough that you can go unnoticed if you want to. We had one grocery store, one movie theater with a flickering sign, and two gas stations on opposite ends of town that always seemed to be competing over who had the cheaper coffee. The winters were long and hard, the kind where snow doesn't just fall, it settles in, piling against houses, muffling the world until the only sound is your own boots crunching in the drifts. The cold here isn't just weather, it's a presence. It sits with you, follows you inside, clings to your bones no matter how high you crank the heat. 6 months before it happened, my parents split up. It was quiet, which I guess is supposed to mean it was better for me, but it didn't feel better. No slammed doors or screaming matches, just long silences at dinner, long nights when Dad wouldn't come home, and one evening when Mom told me he'd be living somewhere else. She said it like she was telling me we were out of milk. I nodded, like it didn't matter. But later that night, I cried into my pillow with my face turned toward the wall so she wouldn't hear. He got a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat across town, and every other weekend I'd sit on his couch pretending the smell of detergent and burnt coffee didn't make me miss our old house. Mom worked more after the split. The urgent care clinic started giving her extra shifts and she took all of them. "It'll help us get back on our feet," she'd say, like we were trying to climb out of something we'd fallen into. We sold the big house with the backyard and moved into a narrow 2-story on Maple Street, wedged between two houses that looked just like it. The neighbors weren't unkind, but they weren't the type to drop by. You could live there for years and still just wave from your driveway without ever knowing each other's first names. The whole street was like that, polite, distant, quiet. Mom tried to make it feel like home. She painted my new room the same blue as before, unpacked the photo albums, even kept the old dented cookie tin we used for storing spare change. I knew she was trying, so I tried too. I kept my grades up, didn't complain, and told her about school even when I could tell she was too tired to really listen. But the truth was, I missed Dad. I missed the version of Mom who laughed more. I missed how our family used to be. That's probably why I looked forward to that sleepover so much. My best friend Tyler was coming over, our first since the divorce. Tyler was loud where I was quiet, fearless where I hesitated. He made everything feel lighter, like problems were just bad jokes you could laugh off. We'd been planning it all week. Pizza from Sal's, a couple movies, and the new Pokemon game he wouldn't shut up about. The snow started falling early that afternoon, thick and slow, spiraling down past my bedroom window. By 5, it was coming down hard, the wind pushing it sideways so it stuck to the glass in little icy streaks. I kept glancing at the street, worried his mom would cancel. But right on time, headlights swept over the snowbank in our yard and his family's minivan pulled into the driveway. He came clomping up the steps like he was trying to crush the snow into submission, his hood half off and his hair dusted white. He stomped hard before coming in, sending little clumps of snow skittering across the floor. "Man," he said, peeling off his gloves. "It's a full-on blizzard. My mom had me text her when we left, then again when we pulled in the driveway like I'm delivering medicine through the Yukon." "You are kind of a mama's boy," I said, grinning. Yeah, but I brought reinforcements." He dropped his backpack onto the couch and unzipped it. Out came 2 bags of chips, a family-size pack of Oreos, and his silver Game Boy Advance with a tangled link cable. "Legend," I said. "Don't I know it?" Mom stepped out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Her hair was pulled back, loose strands framing her face, and she smiled the way she always did when I had friends over. Soft, but with this little flicker of relief. "Hey, Tyler, you hungry?" I was about to call Sal's. "Pepperoni's good," he said. "Done. And I've got hot chocolate for later. Extra marshmallows." Tyler shot me a look that said, "Your mom's the best." I smirked. The evening unfolded exactly how we planned. Pizza, movies, arguing about which Pokemon starter was superior. It's Squirtle. Don't try to change my mind. By 11, Mom kissed me on the head and said she was turning in. "Don't stay up too late," she said, with the tone of someone who knows the advice will be ignored. As soon as her door closed, Tyler grinned. Midnight Pokemon battle. We set up in my room, the wind hissing against the windows. Hours slipped away without us noticing, the glow from our screens painting the walls faint blue. I don't remember falling asleep. I woke to cold. Not the kind you get from a drafty room, but the kind that seems to soak into your bones, making every breath sharp. The quiet was wrong too complete. No wind, no creaks, no hum from the heater. Just silence. I sat up, shivering, and glanced at Tyler. He was still asleep, face half buried in his sleeping bag. My throat felt dry. I figured I'd grab a drink and maybe check the thermostat. The hallway was darker than it should have been, the shadows too deep. Downstairs, the warmth hit me instantly, almost suffocating. The microwave clock blinked 12:47. I filled a glass at the sink, listening for something. But there was nothing. Nothing but the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. I headed back upstairs. The cold hit me like I'd stepped outside without a coat. I slid under the covers, pulling them tight around me. That's when I heard it. Breathing. Slow, steady, deliberate. At first I thought it was Tyler, but the sound wasn't coming from his side. It was closer, lower, from under the bed. My mind scrambled for explanations. The vent? No, that was across the room. My imagination? Maybe. "Tyler," I whispered. He didn't move. "Tyler," louder. He stirred. "What?" "Stop breathing so loud," I whispered. A pause, then a half-asleep laugh. "Dude, I'm barely breathing." "Yes, you are. You sound like Darth Vader." He pushed himself up on one elbow, frowning. "What are you—" He stopped. I'll never forget the way his face changed, confusion draining into something pale and rigid. His eyes dropped. "What?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He just slid back so fast he hit my dresser with a thud. I turned. There was a man under my bed. He lay flat on his stomach, his long, greasy hair framing a face that was too pale, too thin. His eyes were wide, glassy, fixed on mine, and his mouth was curved into the faintest smile. One finger pressed to his lips. "Shh." The sound didn't come from his mouth. It was just the gesture. And then, in a voice soft and calm, he said, "I know your mom. I'm just here to see her." It was too steady, too practiced, like he'd been saying it to himself for hours. Something in me broke loose. "Tyler," I screamed. We bolted, tripping over sleeping bags, slamming into the door frame. Behind us came the scrape of wood, the shifting of weight. We tore down the hallway, our socks sliding on the floor, and burst into Mom's room. She sat up instantly, eyes wide, and locked the door behind us. The pounding started minutes later, slow, deliberate thuds on the wall. Then silence. When the police came, they found the spare room window open. Outside, footprints led to the edge of the yard and vanished in the drifted snow. In the bushes, they found a bag, clothes, a disposable camera, and a folded piece of paper. I didn't see the note until years later, going through Mom's things. "Tell him I'll come back." 5 words, shaky block letters. Sometimes I think about that night, about the cold upstairs, about how long he must have been lying there while we laughed and played games. Sometimes I wonder, was that note for her, for me, or for someone I've never met? And if he's still out there, How would I even know if he already came back? I still remember the winter of 2016, the kind of season that feels like it's been stitched into your skin. So cold it gnawed at the bones, so quiet it made you hear your own breathing, whether you wanted to or not. Our town sat wedged between the gray shoulders of pine-covered hills in southern Oregon, a place most people only saw when they missed an exit off the highway or needed gas before heading somewhere else. Winters there were beautiful in the way a photograph can be beautiful, white still perfect, until you remember photographs are silent, and silence in the real world can sometimes mean danger. I was 14 then, the youngest of 5. Mom had left the Friday before to visit her cousin in Nevada, a trip she'd been putting off for years. She figured we were old enough to keep ourselves alive for a week. My dad had been out of the picture for as long as I could remember, more of a name on a birth certificate than a real person, so that meant the house was ours to run. My oldest sister, Paige, was 22 and technically in charge, though she preferred the role of laid-back babysitter rather than parent. My brother Adam was 20, built like someone who'd been working on cars since middle school, which was true, and more likely to start a snowball fight than make sure the dishes were done. Then there were the twins, Maddie and Brooke, 11 years old and inseparable in that way only twins can be. That Saturday night we were doing exactly what Paige had promised. Nothing. The kind of nothing that's the whole point of being home without a parent. Adam had gone out to grab pizza from the only place still open after 8, and Paige was curled up on the love seat, scrolling her phone with one hand and nursing a mug of cocoa with the other. The twins had taken over the couch, half buried under blankets, arguing over which holiday movie we should watch. Outside, snow fell in fat, lazy flakes that looked harmless under the glow of the street lamp. The wood stove crackled in the corner, filling the air with that sharp, dry heat that makes you want to curl closer to it. For a while, the world felt small and safe. Then Adam came back. The front door slammed, shaking a little of the snow from the wreath hanging there. He stomped the cold off his boots, carrying 2 pizza boxes and a paper bag that smelled suspiciously like hot wings. "Dinner is served," he announced, grinning. His cheeks were red from the wind, his breath still fogging in the air. "And before you ask, yes, I got the breadsticks." Brooke sat up and clapped. Maddie rolled her eyes but grabbed a paper plate. "Finally," Paige said, still half distracted by her phone. "You take forever. Did you stop and rebuild the oven first?" Adam ignored her and tossed me a bottle of blue raspberry Gatorade, the kind I always tried to steal from him. "Don't say I never think of you," he said. I smiled and mumbled a thanks. We settled in, eating with the movie playing low in the background, laughter and little arguments mixing with the crunch of crust and the smell of melted cheese. It was the kind of night you forget to appreciate while you're living it. The sound came sometime after the second slice. At first, it was so faint I thought maybe I'd imagined it, a soft, deliberate scratch from somewhere behind the kitchen wall. Not the random creak of a house in winter. Something slower. Testing. "Do you hear that?" I asked, glancing toward the hallway. "Hear what?" Paige didn't look up. "That scratching." I pointed toward the kitchen, like in the wall. Adam froze mid-bite and tilted his head. For a second we all listened. Nothing. Then scratch, pause, scratch, scratch. It wasn't fast, like a mouse. It was slow, intentional. "Probably a cat," Adam said, setting his plate down. "Both cats are asleep in the laundry room," Maddie replied. "I just saw them." "And the dog?" Paige asked. "In there with them," Brooke said. "She hasn't moved all night." That left no good explanation. Paige finally put her phone down, a wrinkle forming between her brows. "It's probably nothing. Houses make noise, especially in the cold." But the sound came again, louder this time. Adam sighed. "Fine. I'll check the garage." Paige pushed herself up from the love seat. "I'm coming with you. No way I'm letting you get jumped by a raccoon alone." I followed them halfway down the hall before I realized my feet had moved. The garage light flicked on, casting long shadows over boxes of old clothes and Christmas decorations. Everything looked exactly as it should. No overturned bins, no animal darting for cover. "See? Nothing," Paige said, though her voice was too quick, too sure. Adam's gaze drifted upward. The attic access hatch was above the far end of the garage, a metal ladder folded neatly against the wall. "Wait," he said quietly. "You hear that?" At first I didn't. Then came a sound like weight shifting on wood. Not much, just enough to tell you it was there. Before Paige could protest, Adam unfolded the ladder. "It's probably just—" "Don't," Paige cut in, grabbing his arm. "What if—" "Better to check now than wonder all night," Adam said. He climbed into the attic, his boots scraping softly against the boards. From below I could hear him shifting boxes, muttering under his breath. Then a loud thump. "You okay?" Paige called up. "Yeah," Adam said quickly. "Just knocked something." The garage door to the kitchen closed. Slowly. Click. Paige was standing right next to me. My stomach dropped. "Adam, did you just—" "No." His voice floated down from above. The garage light went out. It was as if the darkness swallowed the room whole. In that moment, the scratching returned, louder above our heads. Then, a low chuckle. Quick, sharp, and gone almost before I could register it. Adam's voice erupted. "Get back! Go!" Followed by a heavy crash. "Adam!" Paige screamed. Then the whole house went dark. The TV, the wood stove fan, even the hum of the fridge stopped. From the living room, the twins screamed. Paige grabbed my wrist, pulling me toward them. "Basement now!" We barreled down the stairs in the dark, nearly tripping over the dog, who was snarling at something we couldn't see. We shoved a dresser against the basement bedroom door. Paige tried her phone. No signal. Then the footsteps came. Slow. Heavy. Moving across the floor above us. A man's voice followed. Calm. Almost cheerful. "Paige, Adam, Maddie, Brooke, Eli." He said my name last. My chest tightened. Then, as if leaning right over the floor vent, he whispered, "I brought candy canes." Brooke whimpered. Maddie squeezed her eyes shut. Paige mouthed the words, "Don't make a sound." The footsteps moved again. Then the basement door opened. The hinges groaned. The dog went wild. The man pounded on our barricade. "Let me in," he snarled now. "Don't make me hurt the little one." Something in Paige's face hardened. She grabbed the metal leg from a broken chair. "If he gets in, run," she whispered to me. The pounding stopped. Silence. Then the sharp crack of glass shattering, the small basement window. A hand reached through. The latch clicked. The dog lunged. The man screamed. Paige swung hard. I grabbed the twins and bolted for the stairs. The last thing I saw was blood on the wall. They said we were lucky Adam came to when he did and tackled the man in the kitchen. His name was Raymond Hale. 46. No address. History of stalking, burglary, assault. He'd been living in the attic for days. We moved out years later. On our last visit, Maddie found words carved into the wall behind a cabinet. "I'll be back." Raymond was sentenced to 12 years. That was 9 years ago. Now every time the wind rattles my window at night, I wonder, do people like that forget? Or do they count the days? I used to think you could measure a place by its silences. Hollow Creek, Pennsylvania, had the kind of quiet that pressed on your ears. Not the soft, comforting hush of a snowy night, but a stillness that seemed to be holding its breath. I'd grown up in smaller towns, so I thought I knew quiet. But here it was different. You could walk down Main Street at midnight and hear the hum of the street lamps over your own breathing. And every so often that quiet would shift, like the air had just stepped out of the room and left you alone with something watching. I moved there in late September of 2016, a few months after a layoff from my job in Pittsburgh. It wasn't supposed to be permanent. I was crashing with my old friend Evan while I sorted myself out. He'd inherited his parents' place after they passed, a 2-story white farmhouse on the edge of town, out near the tree line. The kind of house with original wood floors that groaned like they had opinions and a cellar door that didn't quite fit its frame. Evan was one of those people who never left their hometown. He worked maintenance for the local school district and seemed content in a way that made me jealous. We'd kept in touch over the years, even after I left for college. When I told him about losing my job, he said, "Come out here. You can help me with some projects. Clear your head. I got the space." I didn't ask questions. At first, it was exactly what I needed. Evan's place was set back from the road, the backyard giving way to a wall of pines that went on for miles. The air smelled cleaner than anything I'd breathed in years. Days had a rhythm. Coffee, small repairs around the house, grocery runs into town, maybe a beer at Duffy's Tavern in the evening. The people were friendly in a reserved way. Everyone seemed to know Evan, though they kept their eyes on him longer than felt normal when we walked into a room. The first odd thing I noticed was the cellar. It wasn't locked, at least not with a key, but there was a heavy iron bolt across the door. The wood was scratched around the frame like someone had been trying to pry it open from the inside. I mentioned it once casually while we were watching the game. "You keep a bear down there or something?" I joked. Evan didn't laugh. He just said, "Old houses make noises. Best you don't mess with it." Then he turned up the volume and didn't look at me for the rest of the quarter. That night I woke to a sound like something dragging over concrete. It was faint, far away, but it came from below my room. I told myself it was the house settling. Old wood, shifting in the cool air. But then it happened again the next night, and the one after, always between 2 and 3 in the morning. I thought about asking him directly, but the thing about Evan was, if he didn't want to talk about something, you'd hit a wall. And I'd learned over the years that pushing only made him shut down more. Still, I couldn't help noticing things, like how he never went into the cellar, not even for storage, how he'd tense up when the wind rattled the old windows at night, how on certain evenings, he'd walk the perimeter of the house with a flashlight, scanning the tree line before coming back in without a word. A few weeks in, we were at Duffy's when an older man named Carl leaned over from the next table and asked, "You're still in that old Miller place, huh?" Evan stiffened. "Yeah, been there a while." Carl chuckled, but it was dry, humorless. "You ever fix that problem your daddy had down there?" Evan's jaw worked like he was chewing something sour. "Ain't nothing to fix." Carl glanced at me, his eyes glinting under the neon beer sign. "Don't let him fool you. That house don't keep things out. It keeps them in." Evan stood up without a word, dropped cash on the table and walked out. I had to jog to catch up to him in the parking lot. "What the hell was that about?" I asked. "Old man's losing it," he said. "Been telling stories since before I was born. Don't pay him no mind." But his hands were shaking when he lit his cigarette. That night, the dragging sound came again. Louder, longer. And this time, it was followed by a sharp, muffled knock from beneath the floorboards. I didn't sleep. Over the next week, the noises became harder to ignore. Sometimes scratching, sometimes something like whispering if I pressed my ear to the floor. Evan started coming home later, looking worn down. I caught him more than once staring at the cellar door like he was debating something. One rainy afternoon while he was out, I gave in to curiosity. The bolt slid back with more resistance than I expected, like it hadn't been moved in years. The door creaked open, releasing a breath of air that was damp and sour, like old earth and rust. I clicked on my phone's flashlight and shined it down. The stairs were stone, slick with moisture. At the bottom, maybe 15 feet down, the light caught something metallic. That's when I heard footsteps upstairs. I slammed the door, shot the bolt, and tried to look casual as Evan came in, dripping from the rain. His eyes went straight to the door, then to me. "You open it?" "No," I lied. His gaze lingered, but he didn't push it. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of the bolt sliding open. I froze. Footsteps descended the stairs, slow, deliberate. Then silence. Minutes passed. I couldn't tell if I was hearing my own pulse or something moving below. And then, faint but distinct, came the sound of someone climbing back up. The door shut. The bolt scraped into place. I wanted to believe it was Evan, but in the morning, he swore he'd been asleep. He looked at me too long, like he was trying to figure out whether to believe me or whether I'd crossed a line. By now, the air in the house felt wrong, thicker somehow, carrying a metallic tang that coated my tongue. The next week was a blur of tension. Evan stopped going to Duffy's. He barely spoke. And every night, I heard the sounds from below. Sometimes, I thought I could make out a pattern in them, like someone was pacing. The breaking point came on a Saturday. A storm was rolling in, the sky bruised purple and green. I just stepped out of the shower when I heard a loud crash downstairs, followed by a low, drawn-out moan that raised the hair on my arms. I ran to the cellar door. The bolt was hanging loose. I don't know what made me go down. Maybe it was the weeks of unanswered questions, maybe the gnawing need to see for myself. My bare feet slapped the cold stone steps, the flashlight beam shaking in my hand. The air grew colder as I descended, the smell intensifying. Earth, rust, and something sweeter, rotten at the edges. At the bottom, the beam landed on the metallic thing I'd glimpsed before. It was a cage, not big, maybe 4 feet high, 3 feet across. The bars were thick, bent in places. Inside, huddled against the back, was something that at first looked like a person. Its skin was pale, too pale, stretched over a frame that seemed wrong. Shoulders hunched too high, arms too long. The head lifted slowly, and 2 eyes caught the light, reflecting it like an animal's. I stepped back, my heel hitting the wall. It opened its mouth. The sound that came out wasn't a word exactly, but it almost was, like it was trying to remember how. Something clanged above. Footsteps on the kitchen floor. Evan's voice, sharp, urgent. "Get out of there." The thing in the cage shifted, and the movement was unnervingly fluid, like water finding a new shape. Its fingers wrapped around the bars, nails blackened, too thick. I stumbled back up the stairs as Evan thundered down. He slammed the door behind me, shot the bolt, and stood there breathing hard. "What is it?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer right away. His eyes were on the door like he expected it to burst open. Finally, he said, "It's why my parents never left, why I can't, and why you're leaving tomorrow." That night I lay awake, listening. The dragging came again, then the knocking. And somewhere in between, a sound I'd never heard before. A soft, almost human laugh, muffled by the floor. I left at dawn. I've never gone back. But sometimes, when I wake at night in my apartment, I swear I can hear that laugh under the hum of the fridge, just faint enough to wonder if it's real. And I keep thinking, if it was in that cellar all this time, what happens the day the bolt finally breaks? I used to think that bad things only happened in other towns to other people, the kind of stories you hear at the grocery store checkout line or in whispered conversations between parents. Riverton, Michigan, wasn't the sort of place that made the news for anything beyond a high school football championship or a new diner opening downtown. It was the kind of place where you left your bike in the yard overnight and it would still be there in the morning. Where neighbors borrowed sugar and returned it with an apple pie. Where you waved to people you'd never met just because it was what you did. I was 14 that fall, in that strange stretch between being a kid and being something else. Not quite old enough to drive, but just starting to feel like the world was a little bigger than my bedroom and the route to school. It was early November, the air cold enough to sting your nose, but not so cold you couldn't crack the window at night to let the cool breeze creep in under your blankets. That Friday night was supposed to be nothing more than a sleepover. My friend Matt had invited me and 2 others, Chris and Logan, over to his place. Matt lived in a split-level house at the very end of Brookridge Court, a quiet cul-de-sac with just 6 homes, the last one backing up to a stretch of dark pine woods. His mom was a nurse working the overnight shift at St. Mary's, and his dad was out of the picture. His older sister had moved to Grand Rapids for college, so the place was his. and by extension, ours for the night. That kind of freedom felt bigger than it probably was. I got there just after dark, the kind of clear autumn evening where you can hear the crunch of dry leaves under your shoes from a block away. Inside, the heat hit me, thick and dry from the furnace. The living room smelled faintly like cinnamon from a candle his mom must have lit earlier, and somewhere beneath that, the faint dog smell of Murphy, Matt's golden retriever, who greeted me with a thump of his tail before curling back up on the couch. Matt's room was small, just big enough for his twin bed, a desk buried in loose papers and snack wrappers, and enough open floor space for the sleeping bags we'd spread out. We'd loaded up on soda and junk food, hooked up the Xbox, and were blasting through round after round of some zombie shooter game. It was the usual chaos. Chris yelling at Logan for stealing ammo, Logan insisting it was an accident, Matt tossing pretzels into my drink when I wasn't looking. It was past 11 when we finally killed the lights and switched to YouTube videos, sprawled out in the warm darkness with the glow of the screen painting our faces. That's when Chris's voice cut through, casual at first. "Hey, where's my blanket?" Matt didn't even look up. "Check under your sleeping bag. You probably kicked it down there." Chris sat up, the blanketless sleeping bag sagging around his shoulders. "No, I'm serious. It was right here." We all laughed because Chris was that guy, the one who once left his phone in the fridge after grabbing a soda, the one who brought 2 left shoes to gym class. But he wasn't joking. We checked under the desk, behind the bed, even the hallway. No blanket. Matt shrugged, went to the linen closet and tossed him a spare. We figured that was that. 20 minutes later, Logan sat up, his voice sharper. "All right, not funny. Where's mine?" Matt paused the video. "Where's what?" "My blanket. I was just using it. Now it's gone." I remember how the air in the room seemed to shift then. Not cold exactly, but heavier, like the way a basement feels when the lights are off. Matt turned on the overhead light and all of us started looking, not in the half-joking way we had before, but with that quiet focus you get when something doesn't make sense. It wasn't there. The house was locked. The windows shut. Murphy hadn't even moved from the couch all night. 2 blankets gone, right out from under us, and no one had left the room. We sat there for a while, trying to shake it off. Matt made a joke about his sister sneaking home to mess with us, but calls to her went straight to voicemail. Eventually, we decided to head downstairs and make pizza rolls. We were gone maybe 15 minutes. When we came back, Logan stopped in the doorway so abruptly that I bumped into him. Nope, no freaking way. His sleeping bag was gone. Not just the blanket. Everything. Just an empty rectangle of carpet where it had been. We all stared at the spot like it was a crime scene. Nobody laughed. My eyes drifted under Matt's bed, where a corner of gray fleece was sticking out. "Hey," I said, pointing. "There's something under there." I knelt, reached for it, and the moment my fingers touched the fabric, I heard it. This quick, unnatural rustle, like someone shifting fast on a plastic tarp. I leaned down further. There were eyes looking back at me. Human eyes. I froze so hard my body forgot how to breathe. The pupils were wide, almost swallowing the color, the whites showing just enough in the glow from the hallway to make my stomach drop. They blinked. I screamed. So did Chris. We bolted out of the room, tripping over each other in our rush to get to the hallway. Matt slammed the door behind us, his face white. "What the hell was that?" Logan yelled. "Who the hell was that?" Chris demanded. Matt shook his head. "Murphy's been on the couch all night. That wasn't the dog." I was shaking so hard my voice wavered. Those were human eyes. We didn't go back. We dragged our stuff downstairs, Murphy wedging himself against us like he could sense something was wrong. He kept glancing toward the hallway, his ears pricked. We left every light on. No one even pretended to sleep. Around 3, Murphy stiffened, his head snapping toward the dark hallway. His growl started low, almost a vibration, then built into a sharp, loud bark. Something creaked upstairs. Matt's voice was barely a whisper. "Someone's in the house." We armed ourselves with whatever we could find. Fireplace poker, broom handle, even a kitchen knife Matt grabbed from the drawer. We sat in a loose circle, backs together, eyes on the shadows until the sky started to lighten. When his mom came home just after 7, she took one look at us and knew something was wrong. We told her everything. She didn't roll her eyes or tell us we were imagining it. She went straight to the hallway, saw the window near the top of the stairs cracked open just half an inch, and the muddy footprints on the hardwood. The police came. They searched the house, checked every closet, every crawl space, every corner of the basement. Nothing. They said maybe it was an animal, maybe a prank. Maybe one of us had been sleepwalking. We knew that was a lie. A week later, Matt called me. His voice was flat. "They found someone." My stomach nodded. "In the attic," he said. "He's been living there. For months, maybe. Came in through the crawl space under the deck. They found food wrappers, bottles, blankets, stuff from our rooms." I didn't say anything. "He had a knife," Matt added. "A hunting knife." The cops called him a frogger, someone who lives in a stranger's house without them knowing. They move around when you're gone or asleep. They watch. They wait. The worst part wasn't that he'd been there while we slept on the floor. It wasn't even the knife. It was knowing that the whole time we'd been laughing, making jokes, walking barefoot in the dark, he was there, listening, breathing. I've never slept over at Matt's again. His mom sold the house that summer. I still drive past that cul-de-sac sometimes, and every time I do, I look at the attic vent above what used to be his room and wonder how many nights those eyes had been watching before we noticed. And I can't help thinking, how many houses have someone up there right now, waiting? I didn't plan on thinking about that summer again. 15 years had gone by without the memory even brushing against my mind. It had gone to that strange place where childhood events go when they're too unsettling to carry around. Pushed so far back it was like it belonged to somebody else's life, not mine. But sometimes it only takes one stray question to pry open a door you thought was sealed shut. It was last Thursday night, and I was curled up on the couch with Miles, half watching some forgettable movie. He muted the TV during a commercial break and turned toward me with a lazy smile. "Hey," he said, "you've mentioned your cousin before. Emily, right? What's she like?" I thought it was a throwaway question. I started laughing and rattling off stories from when we were kids, like the summer we tried to build a haunted maze in her garage out of bed sheets, cardboard boxes, and a single flashlight, or how we spent weeks obsessed with Goosebumps books, reading them out loud under a blanket fort until our throats were sore. "She's smart," I said finally, "a little shy with strangers and—" I paused, searching for the right words. "And sometimes she's just a little paranoid, I guess." The second I said it, something in me went still. It was like someone had pulled the cord on an old film projector in my mind. The grainy reel started rolling, and there I was, 10 years old, standing on a cracked sidewalk under a fading summer sky, a plastic grocery bag in one hand, my cousin Emily leaning close to whisper, "Don't look now, but that man is following us." I can still feel the air that day, heavy with the scent of hot asphalt and cut grass, humming with cicadas. That summer felt endless, each day stretching out like a ribbon you thought would never end. I was staying with Emily for a week while my parents took a trip to see old friends in Chicago. She was 12, which to my 10-year-old brain made her practically an adult. She lived in a small subdivision on the edge of town called Pine Hollow. Quiet, clean streets lined with neat lawns, the kind of place where you always noticed when someone didn't belong. Her house sat at the far end of a cul-de-sac. It had blue shutters and a porch swing that groaned whenever you sat on it. The neighborhood itself felt almost too still. You'd hear the occasional lawnmower or the distant clink of a screen door, but most of the time it was just quiet, not in a peaceful way, but in a way that made every sound stand out. My Aunt Laura, had picked me up that morning in her faded green minivan. Emily was already waiting in the passenger seat when they pulled into our driveway, wearing cut-off shorts and a t-shirt with a peeling picture of a wolf on the front. The minute I slid in, she turned around and asked, "You brought some books, right?" I grinned and held up my backpack. 3 goosebumps and the one about the haunted mask. Her eyes lit up. "Perfect. We'll read it after the movie tonight." We spent the afternoon in her room, Emily sprawled on her stomach on the floor, me sitting cross-legged by her bed, trading books and arguing about which covers were the creepiest. She had a small stereo in the corner with a cassette player, and at some point she popped in an old tape of the 3 investigators. The narrator's voice crackled faintly over the hum of her box fan. Even now, that sound can yank me right back to that moment. The feel of her faded purple carpet under my legs, the faint smell of her mom's lilac perfume drifting from down the hall. Around 6, Aunt Laura knocked on the doorframe. "If you 2 want snacks for the movie, you'd better run down to the store now before it gets dark." She held out a $10 bill. "Split it. And don't take forever." $10 felt like a windfall. "What should we get?" I asked as soon as her mom was gone. "Candy, obviously," Emily said. "Chips, maybe soda if it's not too expensive." She had a way of turning even the smallest errand into something that felt like a mission. We left the house a few minutes later, Emily with the bill tucked in her back pocket. The air outside was still warm, but the sunlight had softened into that golden haze you get in late August. Pine Hollow's streets were nearly empty. No kids riding bikes, no one watering lawns. Just the faint hiss of sprinklers a block over and the occasional hum of a car passing. The nearest shopping strip was about a 10-minute walk away. It was one of those stretches where the sidewalks suddenly disappear and you find yourself walking along the edge of a wide, sun-bleached road. There was a big supermarket there, a dollar store, and a few other half-forgotten places. Dry cleaner, nail salon, an old video rental spot that was never open when we went by. We talked the whole way, debating whether sour gummies were better than chocolate bars, and whether it was worth blowing part of the budget on soda. The heat still radiated off the pavement, making the air above it shimmer. The supermarket was nearly empty when we walked in. We took forever in the candy aisle, holding up different options, calculating prices on our fingers, and swapping things out to make the math work. We ended up with 2 candy bars, a bag of chips, and a 20-ounce bottle of orange soda. It came to $9 and some change, which Emily stuffed into her pocket. We pushed through the sliding doors back into the dusky light. That's when Emily's voice changed. "Don't look now," she said, low and tight, "but that man is behind us." I froze. "What?" "Yellow shirt. He was in the store, kept looking at us." I started to turn my head, but she grabbed my arm. "Don't, just walk." I laughed, but it came out wrong. "You think he's following us? Why would he?" "I don't know," she said, her voice cracking a little. We kept walking. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. People leave stores at the same time. But then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, steady, matching ours. Every time the traffic noise dipped, the sound of them came clearer. We passed a shop with darkened windows and I caught a glimpse of his reflection. Tall, maybe mid-30s, yellow t-shirt, jeans, empty hands, no shopping bags. "See?" Emily muttered. "He didn't buy anything." "Maybe he's going to another store," I said, but my voice didn't sound convincing. "Then why is he on this side of the road?" She shot back. "Walk faster." We sped up. So did he. By the time we turned off the main road and into Pine Hollow, the streetlights were flickering on. The houses here were spaced far apart, driveways long, front yards shadowed by big maple trees, fewer cars, no one outside. My stomach had tightened into a hard knot. "Don't go straight home," Emily whispered. "What? Why not?" "If he knows where we live." She didn't finish. She tugged my arm. "Turn left, toward the park." We turned. So did he. That was when the last shred of doubt vanished. Emily grabbed my wrist. "Run!" We ran, the bag of candy thumping against my leg. the soda bottle slick in my sweaty grip. I dropped it without meaning to, and it rolled into the gutter with a hollow clunk. The sound of his footsteps quickened, not running, but faster now, like he knew we wouldn't keep up this pace for long. We darted through a side street, cut across someone's yard, and slipped between two hedges. My heart was hammering in my ears. We crouched low, the prickly leaves scraping against my arms, and listened. Nothing. Then, footsteps again, slower this time, deliberate, on the other side of the hedge. Emily's hand clamped over my mouth before I could breathe too loud. The steps lingered, paused, then faded. When we finally crept back toward her street, it was full dark. The porch light was on. We ran the last block and slammed the door behind us. Aunt Laura looked up from the couch. "What on earth? Girls, what happened?" "Nothing," Emily said too quickly. "We just ran because it was getting dark." We didn't read that night. We didn't even watch the movie. We just sat on her bed in silence, the untouched bag of candy between us. Much later, after the house was quiet, I got up for water. Passing her bedroom window, I froze. Under the weak pool of light from the street lamp stood a figure in a yellow shirt, just standing, facing the house. I blinked, and he was gone. Or maybe he'd only stepped into the shadows. I never told Emily that part. We never spoke about that night again. But sometimes I think about him, about how close he was, about how easy it would have been for him to follow us a little longer. And I wonder, how many times in your life has someone watched you and you never knew? The summer before I turned 13 was the last time I ever thought of my neighborhood as safe. It's strange how you never realize you're living in the before part of your life until the moment something happens that tilts the world a little off its axis. Looking back, I can pinpoint that exact night. But back then it started like any other. Just two best friends, a hot July evening, and the kind of small-town comfort that makes you think nothing bad can touch you. Our street was part of a neighborhood called Brookhaven Estates, though it was far from fancy. It was a cluster of modest houses tucked between the railroad tracks and a stretch of woods, about 15 minutes outside Traverse City, Michigan. The houses were old enough to have quirks, crooked door frames, squeaky steps, paint that always seemed a year overdue, but not old enough to be charming in the historic sense. It was the kind of place where every driveway had a basketball hoop that leaned just slightly, where kids rode their bikes in lazy figure eights until porch lights blinked on, where neighbors actually waved when they passed you in their cars. I grew up 3 houses down from my best friend, Jenna Lewis. She had dark, shoulder-length hair that was always a little messy, even right after she brushed it, and a quick grin that made you feel like she was letting you in on a secret. We'd met in 2nd grade, and by the time we hit middle school, we'd become the sort of inseparable pair our parents joked about. If one of us got grounded, the other would mysteriously develop the same fate. When we weren't at each other's houses, we were on the phone or sending each other endless texts. Her house was older than mine, a 2-story with weathered blue siding and white trim. The porch swing out front moaned when you sat on it, and the whole place had a faint, warm smell, like dryer sheets mixed with vanilla, that never went away no matter what her mom cooked. Inside, the floors were a patchwork of old hardwood and faded linoleum, and the stairs creaked in 3 different spots that everyone in the house could identify by sound alone. Her bedroom was upstairs at the front, 2 wide windows overlooking the street. At night, the glow from the street lamp outside would spill across her walls in soft, wavering gold. That summer, I probably spent more nights there than at home. We had a routine. Snack runs to the gas station down the road. Long afternoons on her back deck with our feet up on the railing. Late nights spent watching movies on her iPad while curled up under a mountain of blankets. It was easy, familiar. The night it happened, I walked over just after lunch with my sleeping bag slung under one arm and a grocery bag filled with snacks, an extra hoodie, and a pair of fuzzy socks. The air was thick with humidity, clinging to my skin. Someone a few houses over was grilling, and the smell of smoke and sizzling meat hung in the still air. When I knocked, Jenna threw the door open before I even finished. "Finally," she said, stepping back to let me in. "I was about to come drag you over." The cool blast from the window air conditioning unit in the living room hit me like a wall, and I sighed in relief. We spent the afternoon in our usual lazy way, scrolling through TikTok, painting our nails in ridiculous colors, playing old songs we half remembered from when we were younger. Dinner was lasagna, and afterward her mom brought out a tray of brownies that were still warm in the center. We ate them at the kitchen table, crumbs sticking to our fingers. By the time we went upstairs, the sun had dipped below the trees and the street lamps were flicking on one by one. We decided to build a blanket fort between her bed and the dresser, stringing up fairy lights for ambiance, as Jenna called it. We crawled inside with a pile of snacks and started a horror movie, cheap and full of jump scares. I remember checking the time when it ended, 12:07 a.m. The air inside the fort was stuffy, so Jenna crawled out toward the window to open it. That's when she froze. "What?" I asked, still laughing a little from the last scene. She didn't answer at first, just peered out into the street. "Do you see that?" she finally said, voice low. I joined her at the window, pressing my forehead to the cool glass. Under the flickering street lamp across from her house, a man was pacing slowly back and forth. He'd walk a few steps past one driveway, stop, turn around, walk the other way, stop again, over and over, like he was waiting for something. "Do you know him?" I whispered. Jenna shook her head without looking at me. "Never seen him before." He was dressed wrong for the weather. Dark hoodie pulled up, hands jammed in the front pocket, loose pants hanging over heavy boots. It was still hot enough outside that I could feel the warmth radiating through the glass. His movements were slow and deliberate, and every so often he'd stop completely and stand still for several seconds, like he was listening for something. We watched in silence, breaths fogging the glass. Then he stopped pacing and stood facing our side of the street, his head tilted upward. And then he looked right at us. We dropped to the floor so fast my knee smacked the wood. My pulse was pounding in my ears. "Oh my God, oh my God," Jenna whispered over and over. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe he'd just glanced toward the light in her window. Maybe he couldn't see us at all. "Probably just waiting for a ride," I said, though my voice didn't sound convincing. Jenna didn't answer. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the front door. We froze. Jenna's house didn't have a doorbell. You either knocked or you didn't come in. A second knock followed, louder this time. Her parents were asleep at the far end of the hall. We didn't want to wake them unless we had to. So, stupidly, we decided to check for ourselves. We crept down the stairs, wincing at every creak. The living room was dim, only the faint glow from the street lamp leaking through the curtains. We crouched by the narrow window next to the door and peeked out. It was him. He was standing too close, his hood shadowing most of his face. But his posture was wrong, too still, too tense. Then slowly, he turned his head toward the window. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes wide and sunken like he hadn't slept in weeks. But there was something else. He wasn't looking at me so much as through me, like I was transparent. We ducked again. "What the hell is happening?" Jenna whispered, her voice shaking. The pounding started. He slammed both fists against the glass, rattling the door in its frame. We screamed and bolted upstairs, banging on her parents' door. Her dad jumped out of bed, pulling on a t-shirt as we tried to explain. By the time he got to the front door, the man was gone. The police came 20 minutes later. They searched the yard, shone flashlights into the bushes, drove around the block. Nothing. No footprints. No parked car. One officer said it was probably someone drunk or high, wandering aimlessly. But that didn't fit. He'd looked up at us twice, knocked instead of breaking in, stared like he knew something we didn't. My parents came to get me, and I didn't sleep at all that night. Neither did Jenna. We texted until dawn. Years passed. We stayed friends, even after I moved to Grand Rapids for work. Jenna stayed in Brookhaven until 2 years ago. A few months back, she called me late at night, said she'd been going through old family photos and found one from her 7th birthday. We'd been friends even then. The picture showed her backyard. Balloons, a table with cake, kids running around. There I was in the background, wearing a sparkly shirt and blue shorts. And near the fence, half in shadow, stood a man in a hoodie, facing the camera. No one knew who he was. When Jenna turned the photo toward her webcam on FaceTime, my stomach dropped. It was the same man. He'd been there years before we ever saw him on the street. I still think about that night, about what might have happened if we'd opened the door or if Jenna's dad hadn't been home. And I wonder, if he's still out there, how long has he been watching? I still remember the exact moment I realized that weekend would change everything. It was one of those thick July afternoons in Kentucky, where the air feels heavy, sticky, like you're breathing through a damp blanket, the kind of heat that makes you feel weighed down before you even move. I was 16, bored out of my mind and desperate for something, anything, to break the slow burn of summer. That's how I ended up in the passenger seat of my mom's old Corolla, driving 2.5 hours south to a place called Ashford Hollow, which, honestly, felt like it might have been dropped off the map altogether. I was going to see Mick Harrow. He wasn't exactly my best friend, not the kind you share your secrets with or call at midnight. He was my summer friend, the kind that happens when school lets out and you've got all this time stretching ahead of you. We met at the community pool a couple years earlier, during a lazy afternoon that smelled like chlorine and suntan lotion. I was perched on the edge of the diving board ladder, trying not to fall into the water, when he made some joke about the pool smelling more like bleach than water. I told him that was because kids pissed in it all day. He laughed, and we never really stopped talking for the rest of that summer. We spent our days riding bikes until our legs burned, daring each other to jump off the old railroad bridge into the muddy river below and playing pickup basketball games that didn't really have rules, but made us feel like we belonged somewhere. It wasn't a deep friendship. We barely knew anything about each other. But it was enough to fill those long, slow summer days with laughter and something like belonging. Then school started back, and Mick moved away with his family. His mom said they wanted quiet and space. But Mick told me the truth. His dad got laid off from construction, rent kept climbing, and they had to leave Franklin. They ended up in Ashford Hollow, which was less a town and more a patch of empty roads, fields, and dense woods. I hadn't even heard of the place before. We stayed in touch in fits and starts, texts here and there, occasional calls. Then, that July, I asked my mom if I could visit him. She said no 3 times before finally saying yes, probably because Mick's mom promised she'd keep an eye on us. We left early on a Friday morning. The sun was barely up, and the air smelled of dew and freshly cut grass. The roads weaved through sleepy towns, then grew narrower, rougher, lined with wildflowers and the occasional faded mailbox standing like a relic. As we got closer, I noticed how quiet it was, the kind of quiet that feels like the world is holding its breath. When we pulled into Mick's driveway, the sun was already high and relentless. His house sat at the edge of a thick patch of woods. It was a 2-story with weathered gray siding, a porch that sagged slightly, and windows that caught the light like tired eyes. The grass in the yard was overgrown in patches, the wildflowers pushing through cracks in the gravel driveway. Mick was sitting on the porch railing, wearing a hoodie that looked way too heavy for the heat. His grin was easy, but his eyes were tired, sunken like they carried something he wasn't ready to talk about. "You made it," he said, pulling me into a side hug. "I told you this place was the middle of nowhere." And it was. Standing there, I could hear the cicadas buzzing like static, the soft rustle of leaves, and nothing else. No cars, no dogs barking, no kids yelling, just quiet. Inside, The house smelled like old wood and cleaning products, a scent trying to cover something sour beneath the surface. Mick's mom hovered nervously, offering bug spray, socks, a second pillow, like she was afraid I might vanish. His dad was a man of few words, broad and silent, his hands rough and stained, eyes always fixed on some invisible point. That first day was mostly ordinary. We hooked up his busted Xbox, played some games, half-watched a movie, ate cold sandwiches in the kitchen. But at night, lying in his room with the flicker of Netflix painting shadows on the walls, I heard it. A faint thump, then a scrape, and silence. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Mick froze. "No basement," he said finally. "Not one you can get to from inside." "Then what's under the house?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Dad says probably animals or pipes." It didn't sound like either. The next morning, after a breakfast that tasted like burnt toast and nervous glances, Mick suggested we explore the woods behind the house. The air was heavy, the cicadas loud enough to drown out conversation. We followed a deer trail through thick underbrush, branches snagging at our clothes, the sunlight dappled and weak beneath the canopy. About 200 yards in, Mick stumbled over something cold and metallic. He bent down and brushed away moss and leaves to reveal a rusted cellar door. Wood framed in iron, the hinges crusted with rust, no lock, just a handle half swallowed by dirt. "I didn't know this was here," Mick said, his voice low. "This is straight-up horror movie stuff," I said, stepping back. He didn't laugh. He pulled the handle and the door screamed open on rusted hinges, releasing a wave of smell, earth, rot, and something sharp and chemical that stung my nose. Inside was a narrow shaft descending into blackness, a ladder bolted to one side. The rungs were half-rotted, the metal flaking. Mick's phone flashlight barely pierced the dark. Broken glass glittered like teeth on the dirt floor. A cot stood silent in the corner, like a witness. Then came the sound. Slow, deliberate metal scraping concrete, movement in the dark, hands on the ladder. We didn't wait. We ran. Branches tore at our arms and legs, lungs burning. I felt like the darkness was chasing us. We burst into the yard where Mick's dad was working on the truck. Out of breath, we told him everything. His face hardened. "I thought they sealed that up," he muttered. His mom came out of the kitchen, alarmed. "What's going on?" "Call Frank and Leon," his dad said, voice low and sharp. "I need them here now." 30 minutes later, 2 men arrived with heavy flashlights, tools, and something wrapped in canvas. Mick and I were ordered inside, told not to come out. The men went down into the cellar. Time stretched. 10 minutes, 20. The silence was thick, oppressive. When they returned, none of them spoke. Mick's dad was pale, jaw clenched. Frank looked like he'd seen a ghost. The third man wouldn't even step inside the house. Muffled voices behind the kitchen door, then crying. An hour later, 2 police cars pulled up. Mick and I were herded into his room, told to stay put. The last thing I saw before the door closed was a white sheet being pulled from the back of a cruiser. For years after, Mick didn't respond to my texts. He disappeared. When I was 17, out of the blue, he messaged me. "I wasn't supposed to tell you, but you need to know." "What?" "My dad found 3 full body bags down there. Old ones. Whoever was living under that house was hiding them." My hands trembled as I read his words. Was the guy still down there? "They think so. He was climbing the ladder when we ran, but gone when they went down." I haven't stopped hearing those hands on the ladder. Sometimes late at night I wonder, what if we'd waited 30 more seconds? I was 13 when it happened. Back then, my world was a narrow slice of southern Arkansas. Quiet streets lined with oak and pecan trees, yards dotted with rusted basketball hoops and lawn chairs that hadn't moved in years. The town was small enough that the lady who bagged your groceries also knew your grades and the date of your last haircut. People left their doors unlocked, not because it was smart, but because it was just what people did. My parents both worked long hours at St. Francis Medical Center in Pine Bluff. My dad as a radiology tech, my mom in the ER. Their schedules were as unpredictable as Arkansas weather. Some weeks I saw them more in passing than in conversation. That meant our house, an old two-story with peeling white paint and a porch swing that creaked whenever you sat on it, became a hangout spot for neighborhood kids after school. There was always someone in the kitchen grabbing a Coke from the fridge or sprawled on the couch in front of the TV. That Friday in late October felt like it could have been any other start to the weekend, except I'd finally worn my parents down about having Blake stay over for the entire weekend. Blake and I had been friends since the 4th grade, when he showed up at Pine Bluff Middle looking like he'd been dropped into the wrong movie. He'd moved from some small town in Ohio I could never remember the name of. He carried himself like he was already used to being the new kid. Shoulders hunched, eyes always scanning, like he was trying to figure out which corners were safe. By 7th grade, we were inseparable. We'd skate on cracked sidewalks, fish for brim down at the pond behind the Baptist church, and walk to the corner store for sunflower seeds and Dr. Pepper, like we were kings of the neighborhood. Blake had this way of making every dumb little thing feel like an adventure. Sneaking into the old baseball field after dark, daring each other to ride our bikes through the creepy underpass by the highway. But lately, he'd been different. Less of the reckless laughter, more long silences. He'd started showing up to school with expensive sneakers one week, a brand new iPhone the next. If anyone asked, he said his uncle sent him stuff, because family looks out for each other. I never pushed. Blake didn't talk much about his family, and I knew better than to ask too many questions. He lived with his mom in an apartment complex just outside of town, one of those faded brown buildings with broken swings in the playground and old Christmas lights still hanging in the middle of summer. I'd only been there once, in the 4th grade, and even then he acted twitchy, like he didn't want me looking too closely at anything. After that, we just always hung out at my place. That Friday afternoon, we camped out in the basement with a stack of pizza boxes, cans of Mountain Dew, and a pile of horror DVDs that we definitely weren't supposed to be watching. My parents came downstairs around 10 to tell us goodnight, reminding us not to stay up too late. As soon as their footsteps faded upstairs, Blake grinned and suggested we sneak out to skateboard in the empty church parking lot. We actually stepped outside, but the wind had a bite to it that made my ears sting, so we bailed and headed back in. Instead, we loaded up another movie, a slasher set in the middle of nowhere, and demolished half a bag of Doritos while talking about nothing and everything. I must have drifted off around 2 in the morning, sprawled sideways on the couch with my hoodie pulled over my face, the TV casting that cold blue glow that makes everything feel like a dream. What woke me wasn't a noise exactly. It was the absence of one. You know that prickly feeling you get when your brain registers that something's off before you know what it is? The TV was still murmuring in the background, but the steady rhythm of Blake's breathing was gone. I pushed the hood off and sat up. His sleeping bag was still there on the floor, neatly unrolled, the pillow perfectly in place like he'd never even gotten in it. I figured maybe he was in the bathroom upstairs, so I waited for the sound of running water or the flush of the toilet. Nothing. 5 minutes. 10. My skin started to crawl in that way it does when you feel alone in a place you shouldn't be. The bathroom light was off. The door stood wide open. No Blake. That's when I heard it. A faint sliding sound, soft and deliberate. Then the faintest clink of metal against metal. I knew that sound. My mom's jewelry box. It was a wooden box with a brass latch, the kind you had to tilt just right to get it to open. She kept it on her dresser in my parents' bedroom. I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The sound came again. Drawer sliding open. Slow, like whoever was doing it was trying not to be heard. I crept closer, pressing myself to the wall to avoid the floorboards I knew would squeak. The door to my parents' room was cracked just enough for me to see inside. And there he was. Blake stood at my mom's dresser, the beam from his phone flashlight cutting across the room. His black JanSport backpack was open on the bed, He moved fast but careful, like he'd practiced this before. Pearl necklace into the bag, envelope of cash from the top drawer, Dad's vintage watches from the wooden case he loved. It hit me like ice water. This wasn't an impulse. He was prepared, fully dressed in jeans and sneakers while I was still in pajama pants and socks. Something in me made a sound, maybe just a sharp breath, but it was enough. Blake's head snapped toward me. For a second, neither of us moved. His face shifted through a dozen expressions: shock, guilt, then something cold and unreadable, like I was seeing the real version of him for the first time. "Oh," he said, like I'd caught him grabbing a soda from the fridge. "Hey man, your mom asked me to get something for her." The lie was so bad it made my stomach turn. My mom was asleep 3 feet away from him. We both knew it. "Put it back," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Put it back right now." He straightened, one hand tightening around the backpack strap. "You don't understand," he said. "I need this. My mom, she's about to get kicked out. I wasn't going to take all of it, just enough to help." But his eyes weren't pleading. They were calculating. Behind him, my dad let out a loud sigh in his sleep. Blake froze. So did I. Then he smiled, a small, sad curve of his mouth that made my stomach sink even further. "Come on, man, your parents are doctors, they won't miss this stuff. You've seen where I live, you know my situation." And the awful part? For a flicker of a second, I did want to let him go. This was Blake, my best friend, the kid who'd been there for me when my dog died, who'd taught me to ollie, who knew all my secrets. But then I pictured my mom's face when she realized her grandmother's necklace was gone, my dad's silence when he saw his watches missing, and how they'd look at me, knowing I'd let it happen. "If you walk out that door," I said, "I'm waking them up right now." The coldness in his face hardened. Without a word, he shoved past me, hitting my shoulder hard enough to send me into the doorframe. I grabbed for the bag, missed, and he was already pounding down the stairs. By the time I reached the front door, he was halfway down the street, his dark shape swallowed by shadows, the October air slicing into my skin. I stood there for a long time, bare feet on cold wood, watching the place where he'd vanished. Part of me still thought he might come back, say it was all some stupid prank. He didn't. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the living room staring at his empty sleeping bag, his phone charger still plugged in, the half-eaten bag of chips we'd been sharing hours earlier. When my parents came down at 7, I told them everything. My mom's face went from confusion to shock to a kind of disappointment I'd never seen before, like she wasn't even mad at Blake, just herself for trusting him. The police came. They dusted for prints even though we knew who'd done it. Blake and his mom were gone. The landlord said they'd cleared out in the middle of the night, leaving behind holes in the drywall and 3 months unpaid rent. We never got the stuff back. Weeks later, I learned from other kids that I wasn't the only one. Blake had stayed at least 6 houses that fall. Each time something went missing: an iPad, golf clubs, a jar of quarters, a laptop, always from families that trusted him. The detective called it a pattern of exploitation. To me, it was simpler. Blake had turned friendship into a weapon. A year later, my mom showed me a mugshot she found online. He'd been caught 2 states away, breaking into another house during another so-called sleepover. 16 years old, already facing charges in multiple states. He looked older, tired, hollow-eyed, like he'd already given up. Sometimes I wonder if I could have stopped it, if I'd said something earlier, noticed the signs. But mostly I remember standing in that doorway, watching my best friend disappear into the dark with a backpack full of stolen memories. And I still ask myself, when the people you trust show you who they really are, how many chances do you give before you believe them?